So we have absolute mutiny on the right now. We have a revolt currently happening against Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Now, you guys remember, for Kevin McCarthy to become Speaker in the first place was difficult because there were a bunch of very strong and committed holdouts. Lauren Boebert was one of them, and you had Matt Gaetz was another, and they basically had this gaggle of far-right Freedom Caucus people, basically the former Tea Party people. They got together and they were like, we're going to demand a whole bunch of concessions from McCarthy before any of us support him. So he kind of weakened his position going into being Speaker because he had to agree that basically they could oust him with not much of a process, or certainly not many members signing on for that. And now here we are. So McCarthy was negotiating with Joe Biden over the debt ceiling. And, you know, we've gone over the terms of the debt ceiling agreement. Basically, what we're looking at, to sum it up, is like freezing the federal spending, which is effectively like a 2% cut to the programs that are not Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and defense. So it's like, you know, SNAP, which is the food stamp program, TANF, TANF, which is the welfare program. Like, these are the programs that are basically being frozen. There are some caveats that sort of complicate the picture a little bit, but I'm just giving you the gist, the Cliff Notes version of what went down in this deal. Now, the far-right Republicans are looking at this, and they're losing it. And they're going, you're weak, you're a cuck, you got rolled by a guy who can't find his pants in the morning, which, by the way, is a direct quote from some Republican congresswoman who said, like, how'd you get defeated by a guy who can't find his pants in the morning? To which Ilhan Omar responded, how do you know that Biden can't find his pants? What are you doing with Biden? Well, now, here comes the outrage. So House Republican Chip Roy threatens McCarthy's speakership over debt deal, quote, betrayal. So they're going hard, man. They are not mincing words. Congressman Chip Roy of Texas threatened to bring an end to Kevin McCarthy's only months-long stint as Speaker of the House today should the debt ceiling deal brokered by McCarthy pass. Roy was among the Republican holdouts who refused to vote for McCarthy at the start of the 118th Congress, but eventually supported him after McCarthy granted a number of democratizing concessions to the rebels. On Tuesday, Roy accused McCarthy of reneging on that deal in order to make one with President Joe Biden. In an interview with Glenn Beck, Roy previewed a forthcoming meeting with GOP leadership, insisting that House Republicans could still kill this and start over and do the right thing, characterizing it as a betrayal of the power-sharing agreement that we put in place during the negotiations that made McCarthy Speaker. Roy signaled that the bill's passage could mean McCarthy's replacement. Quote, then we're going to have to regroup and figure out the whole leadership arrangement again, he continued. Then during a House Freedom Caucus press conference, Roy argued that not one Republican should vote for this deal. It's a bad deal, while accusing McCarthy of having divided the Republican caucus. Let me pause here to point something out that these Tea Party folks would never admit. First of all, they have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea at all. The fact that Biden was willing to engage at all on any issue, even a little bit, is a sign of good faith from Biden, but also a sign of colossal weakness. Because Biden absolutely has the authority to either mint $1 trillion coin, which gets us around this whole problem at all, or invoke the 14th Amendment, which says, hey, we have a contradicting federal laws here. I'm going to go with the Constitution, which says that the federal debt shall not be questioned. So in other words, he could have subverted this whole crisis and not changed anything. But he decided, because he's a 1990s neoliberal centrist, I'll just negotiate and we'll make some sort of a deal and we'll move forward. So from that perspective, literally any concession Biden made at all, even a freeze of federal spending or 2% cut, that's a big concession. That's a big concession. So, but they don't look at it like that because they feel like, oh, he can't act on his own, or they're lying to themselves and convincing themselves that he can't act on his own. Well, guys, if Biden were to invoke the 14th Amendment, you know what would happen? There'd be a bunch of lawsuits. It'd go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court would have to decide, do we want to make a decision that plunges the U.S. economy and potentially the global economy into recession and or depression? Now, the Supreme Court, if they're anything, they're corrupt, which means they're going to side with capital. They almost always side with capital. Capital doesn't want that to happen. They don't want to have this debt ceiling debacle. So they'll very likely actually side with Biden. So that's my guess as to how it would unfold. Now, Biden, of course, cucked himself, bent the knee, negotiated, did some cuts when he didn't have to do any cuts. Remember, the way the debt ceiling works, guys, we've talked about this analogy before. But let's say you go to a restaurant and order $200 worth of food. Then the bill comes and you go, oh, I'm not paying that. Is that a thing? That's not a thing. You can't do that, right? I only have $70 on me. I can't afford this $200 bill. Like, okay, well, you better go find a way to get $200 because you bought the food, now you got to pay for it. That's what this debt ceiling debacle is. If you think the spending is too much, Republicans, you have to work that out during the budget negotiations. You don't work that out, after we've already committed to spending that money. You can't go, well, now I want to change it. That's not how it works. So look, if I was in Biden's shoes, this wouldn't have been a crisis in the first place. Now, Bernie Sanders said when Democrats held the House, the Senate, and the presidency, then they should have raised the debt ceiling. I wouldn't have even done that. I would just, as president, say, no, there is no more debt ceiling. Gone. 14th Amendment, gone. And go ahead. You want to challenge me in court? By all means. Because guess what? Even if the Supreme Court were to side with Republicans on that, everybody knows where the blame lies. When mayhem breaks loose, everybody knows, hey, the president tried to do the right thing here, and the Supreme Court blocked him, and the Republicans blocked him. And so blame them for this giant recession and or depression. So anyway, literally all of these people don't know what they're talking about. They don't know they don't understand the basics of what's going on here. And you can tell, by the way, also with how they speak about the debt. They really think that the amount of money we have in the national debt is like a crisis that's going to destroy our country or something. That's not how the national debt works. You simply don't understand how it works. They've been predicting a debt crisis in Japan since literally the 1990s, and it hasn't come. Why? Because in the case of the U.S. too, we have a sovereign currency. So when you have a sovereign currency, you can do deficit spending. You can have a debt. And by the way, the real metric you should look at is debt to GDP ratio. On that metric, we're right smack dab in the middle of a bunch of countries around the world. The idea it's like this huge problem. No, that's right-wing economic fear-mongering. They don't know what they're talking about. They want to use this. It's a red herring because what they really want to do is just cut the social safety net. And so they use the deficit or the debt as an argument for, well, we have to do it because look at the debt and the deficit. No, you don't have to do it. You just want to do it. Okay, so it's not just Chip Roy. There's a growing chorus of these people. So here's Dan Bishop. He went on CNN. Listen to what he says.
You said today that a motion to oust McCarthy as Speaker is on the table. If this debt ceiling deal goes to the floor for a vote, are you going to make good on that threat?
Well, we'll see, Brianna. I always work with others. My view is it is going to have to be done. But the more important thing at hand is the legislation that's before us. And I'm working intensively. You mentioned there are a number of us who are House Freedom Caucus members or more appropriately were among the 20 in January who were contesting the Speaker's race until we had a brass tacks deal on which to go forward, and that produced great unity. But there are other members of the Republican conference today, Nancy Mace, Corey Mills, Wesley Hunt, Mike Waltz, others who are coming out saying that this deal cannot be done. The Republican conference needs to now salvage us from this error before it's too late.
He wants to oust McCarthy too. A bunch of these people want to oust McCarthy. So how is this going to unfold? Look, I don't think they have the votes to get this through a regular process. Because you need over 100 Republican votes in order to get that done. There's some other way to do it where you would need, I think it's only like 5 or 6 Republican votes. If you have all the Democratic votes or the overwhelming majority of the Democratic votes, you only need some Republican votes. They could probably get it done that way. But look, at this point, what I'm hoping for is this thing gets totally voted down. The clock has now run out to the point where you don't have time to go through Congress anymore. Because in that moment, Biden would have no choice but to say, I'm just going to do it unilaterally. And then if you do it unilaterally, yeah, you might have the court cases. But again, I think the Supreme Court would side with Biden on this for the simple fact that Biden is where the capital is. Because staving off a recession or depression is sort of like a dub position for capital, right? So I hope that's what happens. I hope it sort of fails. And as a result of that, there's not enough time left on the clock to do another deal. And so then the Republicans get absolutely bupkis. They get nothing. That would be ideal. And this would sort of be similar to the situation which happened under Obama, which is he had put cuts to Social Security and Medicare on the table. But the Tea Party caucus at the time was so extreme, they were demanding more cuts. And so we ended up getting no cuts because they demanded too much. So I kind of hope a similar thing happens here. It's possible that happens, but what's also possible is they use the other process, not the regular process, the other process where they just need, basically a handful of Republican votes in order to get this through. But, from my perspective, I think virtually every Democrat will support the deal. you might have anywhere from 0 to 10 holdouts on the progressive side. And then on the Republican side, I think the majority of Republicans are going to be against it. So that's what I think of. Now, by the time this segment posts, it's possible that we already have the answer. It's possible that by the time this segment posts, I know that they're having an emergency meeting basically right now as I talk to you guys. The Freedom Caucus is having that meeting. It's possible that they come out of that meeting and they're like, not only are we rejecting the deal, but we're going to get rid of Kevin McCarthy. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how it unfolds. But look, it's very, very hard to govern when you have basically a gaggle of total idiots in the so-called Freedom Caucus. Really, it's the Tea Party caucus. And you have a Democratic president who's always trying to like split the difference and negotiate and be bipartisan. Well, when you negotiate with people who are fully batshit crazy, what ends up happening? You get a half batshit crazy agreement. And that's where we are. And so I hope he has to do it unilaterally, because this whole debt ceiling nonsense has to stop. And if they approve this deal, we're just going to have another fight in 2 years. And it's not worth it. It's not necessary. It's really dumb, and it hurts a lot of people. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.